to Lesson 14 of Client-Side Web Development. And today we'll be talking about using CSS transformations and transitions. So just a quick summary of what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about how to transform elements by rotating, scaling, moving, and tiling them, how to work with transformations in 3 dimensions, how to apply multiple transformations to one element, and how to do simple animations with the transition property. Okay, so understanding how the CSS transformations work. CSS lets you transform an element in several ways. You can rotate the element, you can scale it, translate it, skew it, etc. So you can use the translate property, and the translate property has a bunch of different choices that you can use on it. One of them is to rotate, and that you can use that to rotate an element a certain number of degrees, from 0 to 360 degrees. So I do have an example of that. So if we go to the transformation, this transform menu item, these are a bunch of different transformations that we've done. So these are all divs, and what we've done is we've transformed the divs. They started out as just these squares, as you can see here, but this one we did the transformation of rotated them. So we rotated this div by a certain number of degrees. So how did we do that? Let's go back here. So if we go to the transform HTML here, we'll do that, and then we'll look at the style CSS. Okay, so these are all the divs that we created, and I added these classes to each of the divs, and these classes will inform what transformation I did on each div. So the first one is the square rotate class. So let's look at what we did there. Here's the square rotate. Again, we did like typical things. I just made it a square, so it's 100 pixel by 100 pixel, orange background. But here's the transformation that I did. I did the transform rotate, and I rotated by 45 degrees. So that's what got that that look you hear, is that's a 45 degree rotation. Okay, and what we did, these down here, this top and left, basically I wanted to position these divs on the page exactly at a certain pixel location. So the top is 200 and the left side is 100. That's the initial position, and then the rotation happens at that position. Okay, the next one we'll look at is the square scale, and that is this one. Oh, well, you know what? Let's go back here and talk about the square scale first. And if you want to make elements larger and smaller, you can use the scale transformation. And this property, to make it smaller, again, use transform scale, and then you give it a horizontal and a vertical scaling. Passing only one parameter scales it both horizontally and vertically the same way, and passing in negative values makes the element transform in a mirror image kind of way. So here we scaled it up from 100 pixels, and if you look at the transformation here in the scale, we basically doubled the size. So we basically doubled it. It was 100 by 100, we doubled it to 200 by 200. Okay, let's go back here. That was the scale. The next is a translate, and this basically moves an element to a defined amount of space. So if we look over here, this square was actually originally here, and what we did is we translated it over a certain amount. So to see where we moved it, we'll look down here in the translate, and basically we didn't move it vertically in any direction. So we said 0 pixels vertically, but horizontally we moved it by 150 pixels. So that's why it's all the way over here, where originally it should have been 150 pixels over. That was the original position. All right, so let's look at the next slide, which is we're going to be talking about the skewing, and basically it allows you to kind of slant the shape in kind of weird ways. So you can say skew to slant it in any of the two axes. So in this particular one, let's go over here first. This one we went ahead and skewed, but what we did is we basically turned the square into a rhombus, right? Because we skewed it. So how did we do that in our CSS? Well, basically we said, hey, let's skew it by 15 degrees, and that transformed it over. Basically made it look like a rhombus at this point. All right, next thing you could do, and that's the thing, is you can actually combine multiple transformations. Like you can do a rotate, scale, translate, skew, throw that all together. I believe that's what I did with this one over here. And then if you look at the multiple, so I did a rotation, a scale, a translate, skew, all of them you can apply to one element, and I'll go ahead and do that. And the result looks like this. I moved things all over the place for this one. All right, the next thing we're going to discuss is transforming elements in 3 dimensions, which is kind of cool because it lets you transform those elements and move them. You not only have X and a Y axis where you can go up and down horizontally or vertically, you can also move it or rotate it in using the Z scale. So basically the way you do it is you can do a rotate 3D and then give it a scale and then give it an angle that you want to rotate your div or your shape in that. So if you want to look at an example, we'll look at this 3D transformation. Again, this one I rotated, but what I want to do is I want to show you how to kind of better rotate it. So here we have the rotate 3D. Again, we have rotate, we put the location in absolute, but now we want to rotate it in a 3D manner. Actually, probably the better way to do the rotation, because remember it's X, Y, and Z. So let's rotate it on the Y axis. So that's why I put the 1 here. And what I want to do is I want to actually do a 180 degree rotation. So I'm going to change this to 180 degrees. We'll go back to our thing here, and here we have the rotation happened on the Y-axis, which is up and down, so it rotated it in 3D, and what happens is it actually puts it so you're looking at it from the other side in 3 dimensions. So I kind of flipped it, so now it's the writing is backwards because you're looking at it from the back. So that's a neat effect that you can do on your on any of the shapes or divs that you have on your website. Okay, so that's 3 dimension. CSS transition, you want to use transition properties to indicate that CSS property should transition. You can do transition duration to indicate the amount of time the transition is going to take. Then you have transition timing function, a delay, and a kind of, you can also tell it how you want the transition. Do you want it to ease in and out? And there's a bunch of different ones that you can try here. So I'm not going to go through all those. Those you can probably look up. You can go to W3 Schools to look that up, or I think they list them also in the book on chapter 14. But what you can do, let's go ahead and go to transition and see one of these transition. Now the nice thing about this one is the transition won't happen until I hover over the div. So here I'm going to hover, and now you can see the transition. What it's doing is it's scaling it to a certain size. Again, when I take the hover out, it goes back down, and then when I hover back, it goes back out. So how did I do that? Let's go ahead and we'll go through this transition. Well, here there's basically two transitions. So I created this transition class. So here we go. I want to look at this transition class here. And all I did is I created a div where it's where I give it the class of transition. So that's over here. And this describes the transition. And I describe the transition here and saying, hey, I want to make this 4 times wider and higher. I give it a top left location here. So basically I expand the width by 4 times the size and the height by 4 times the size. I'm sorry. This is not the size. This is the number of seconds. So basically it tells it to the transition should happen in seconds. And then down here, so basically it says it's a 4-second transition. So it kind of gives you a certain length of time that it happens, so that the timing, so it takes that long for the transition to occur. And then the hover tells it to expand. It's actually expanding from 100, which is the transition up here, to 300. So it changes. So this marks kind of the change. So when you hover over here, this transition takes place, and it changes from, the height changes from 100 to 300, the width from 100 to 300 all happens uniformly. So it looks like a very smooth animation there. So one thing you have to be aware of is you're going to have to apply the transition on the original class, not on the hover, when you do this. Okay, so again, you can change the timing of a transition. You can say ease in, ease out. You can make it linear, move at a steady pace. In our case, we didn't give it a, we didn't add a timing function, so I think it just used the default on that one. There's also, you can add, you can use JavaScript to trigger transitions. So this is a way that you can use JavaScript. In this example, I did not go through the, didn't do the transition with JavaScript, but this kind of shows you how to do it. We're going to cover JavaScript later on in the course, so we'll go with more details when we get there. But you can use JavaScript so that when you click on a button or something, it kicks off a JavaScript that enables this transition. And the way you would do that is, so when you click on a button, it'll change the class. It'll change the class from one class to another, and that will trigger the transition. So that's another way of triggering it. The way we triggered it here is with the hover, but you can also use JavaScript, and you do that by changing the div, or excuse me, add a class or change the class on your div. Okay, so that's it for lesson 14. Thank you for joining us, and we'll speak again next time. Thanks.